Welcome to the Cannabis Enlightened podcast with Dr. Leroy, brought to you by March and Ash at marchandash.com. I'm Chris Cantori, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to your host, Dr. Leroy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Cannabis Enlightenment. I am your host, Dr. Leroy Brady, and as I've said many times, I teach a course on the campus of San Diego City College called The Business of Cannabis. And as I teach this course, I come across a lot of different questions, some very interesting guests that come into the class, and the questions bring forth more and more guests that I need to bring on. From the class, we developed this podcast, and one of the students named it Cannabis Enlightenment. And we are so happy today to have a very special guest. I met this guest, as many of you have met people during the pandemic, during a Zoom meeting. I've never met her until today, face to face. And so we spent some time saying, ooh, you look like that, and I look like this. So it's very interesting to meet people face to face after being on Zoom for so long. Pattie, and she will introduce herself in just a minute. When I met her during a cannabis social equity kind of an event or a project, we both introduced ourselves, and I think she was intrigued with me teaching the class, and I was most intrigued with her talking about hemp. And she just would, I think as she introduced herself, she went on and on about hemp, and I said to myself, I got to have that lady on my program, in my class, and also in the on the podcast. So, without any further ado, as they say, I'm going to let Pattie introduce herself, talk about what she does, and then we're going to take it from there. So, Pattie?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Brady. My name is Pattie Harris. Most people in the cannabis industry call me Patty Cakes Harris. Little background about why that happened. Before Prop 64 in the 215 days, when cannabis was medical in the state of California, I used to make diabetic-friendly edibles, and they are really not found in dispensaries. They're getting better now. There's a lot more products that are sugar-free and have low carbs and that kind of thing. They're healthy for people that are diabetic. But I'm diabetic. I'm type 1 diabetic since I was a child, and I couldn't eat sugar. So.
And what does the type 1 when you talk about it? So
insulin dependent.
Okay.
You have to take insulin.
Okay.
So I made my own edibles, and I started, giving them to my friends, and I met some people in some dispensaries. I started supplying them to dispensaries. And one of my good friends used to call me or text me and say, I need some more patty cakes. And so that's where it came from.
I see. I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So it has to do with the product that you had developed and that you were
Yes.
Supplying people with.
Yes.
Okay. I thought it was something from high school or something cultural. And I'm just trying to figure out, how do I get into this and ask her about this? But great.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So it's directly a cannabis related thing, because I actually did start a company. We never got licensed or anything, so I don't manufacture patty cakes other than for myself or my friends. But eventually I would like to get licensed and do that again.
Great name for a product.
Yeah, thank you.
Patty Cakes by Pattie.
Patty cakes, yeah.
Yeah.
And they're really healthy. They're sugar-free, gluten-free, high protein. They're savory, they're not sweet.
And what does it do for the body?
So Okay, let me give you a little bit more of my background. Okay. I am an academic. I have several degrees. I specialized as a teacher for people with autism and other developmental disabilities. Mm-hmm. So I have a lot of training in psychology, a lot of training in medical sorts of things. And so I wanted to develop something that was actually good for you, and completely good. Not like, okay, well, there's sugar in there, it's inflammatory, but CBD's anti-inflammatory. It's sort of this balance thing, but with something that had all wholesome ingredients that would agree with most people and not cause inflammation. That was my objective. So one of the things I put in these little patty cakes was turmeric. And I didn't know this when I started, but I knew that turmeric was an anti-inflammatory plant. And when I very first started making them, they would make me really high. So I did a little research, and I found out that turmeric and cannabis are actually synergistic. So then I'd give them to people, and there'd be like very little, maybe like 5 grams of THC in the cake. But with the turmeric, people would be like, this thing put me to sleep.
Okay, so the turmeric is not THC.
No.
It's plant-based?
It is.
Okay.
It is a root plant. The active ingredient is called curcumin, and it is a phytochemical that actually interacts with cannabis in your body, and it helps it to work a little better. So that was kind of a interesting experience for me to learn that. So going forward, I've had a lot of patient advocacy work. I started doing that in 2011, teaching people about cannabis. I have had an opportunity to teach many, many seniors about cannabis that are interested in it. And then a few veterans, and then some people with autism. So when I stopped teaching kids with autism in 2016, and that's when I started my company, Pattie Cakes. And I had been in the closet about using cannabis before that because I didn't want people who I was teaching their children to know that I was using cannabis. I didn't go to work high. I never did anything like that. But there was a stigma there, and I didn't want to muddy the water with the fact that, I was with their child and I was a cannabis user.
Okay, so I can tell you're a very humble person, but I want to go back a couple of words that you have said. You said you are an academician, which means you've been to college. So Can you share with us what that means? Yeah. The audience needs to know your depth and breadth of knowledge.
Okay. I back in the 80s, I got a degree. It was called a Bachelor of Integrated Science, where I had electronic engineering, mathematics, and fine arts as a triple major. And the whole reason I did that is because I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I became a teacher.
Okay.
And then I did that for, probably, I don't know, close to 30 years. And then in 2016, I decided to retire from that. And so when I was teaching kids with autism, I went to Florida Institute of Technology. I got a postgraduate certification in applied behavior analysis. And then I went to National University and got a degree in psychology. And now I am going to the Chicago School of Professional Psychology to get a master's in psychopharmacology. So I'm kind of nerdy.
Well, I see it as a person who is constantly reinventing herself, constantly in search of knowledge.
Yeah.
And, my slogan, as you can see I have on my shirt, is, knowledge is power.
Yes.
So your power is the knowledge that you continue to gain.
Yeah.
So as people listen to you talk about hemp and cannabis, they need to know that it's not just, I just woke up one morning, I had a dream, and now I want to share this dream with you. This comes backed by years of education and devotion and passion, too. What's going on in the hemp industry.
It is. And I never used cannabis until 2011. Like, I tried to get high one time in college, and I didn't know how. And so I never had. When I very first started, I was a victim of all the propaganda. And I was really nervous and really like, oh, is it going to melt my brain? All that kind of stuff. But because I'm diabetic, I have a condition called neuropathy, and that causes neuropathic pain throughout your body. And I was on 5 different pain medications. 3 of them are opioids, and the other one was gabapentin. And then I had another anti-inflammatory drug. And I kept telling the doctors, this is too much for me. I also was taking benzodiazepines, which all of those drugs interact. And so I kept saying, this is too much. This is not good. When they put me on gabapentin, that was the last pain medicine they put me on. And I literally felt like a zombie. And they had me on a high dose. And I said, I'm not doing this. And I got off. I took it for 3 weeks and then stopped and started doing research. And I was like, how can I get off of these opioids? And I was clearly dependent on them. I don't say addicted, but I probably was. So I did a lot of research and I kept coming up with THC. So I was like, how bad could weed be compared to opioids? You know what I mean?
So give me a feel for how much of that medication you were taking in terms of number of pills and or money that it would cost you.
The money, it was covered by my insurance, so that really wasn't an issue. But I was taking Vicodin, Tramadol, Lortab, Oxycontin, and then gabapentin. Let's see, what was the opioid? The benzo I was taking was Xanax.
Now, these are separate pills you were
All
taking.
separate pills every day.
Once a day or several times a day?
Gabapentin, I think it was 3 times a day. And then the other ones were once a day. And some of them were as needed. So like if the pain got really bad, was kind of a breakout thing, then I would take, this extra thing. If I had trouble sleeping, I had Xanax. So it was really a lot of drugs. And I have, because of the diabetes and the other problems, I was on a lot of other drugs. I was on statin medications. I was on antidepressants. I was on anti-anxiety medicine. I was on a lot of drugs.
And I'm sure that the listening audience is able to identify with you.
Yeah.
And say, wow, those are the kind of drugs that I've taken or I'm on right now.
Yep.
So I can imagine several people are just like really coming close to whatever device they're using to hear this and saying, gosh, I need to hear more from this woman. So what was, you were kind of alluding to it, what was the turning point? The turning point was you were a zombie.
Yes, totally.
And you didn't like that.
I couldn't work. I couldn't drive a car. I didn't feel safe driving. So,
and I'm glad you couldn't drive a car.
I know, right? Yeah. A zombie driving a car.
No, that's not a good thing.
No, not at all.
Maybe zombies on film is good, but not driving a car. No.
Yeah. So when I very first started, I went to a dispensary and they were very helpful. And they said, well, try this and try that. And it was, I started with smoking flower, but I cough a lot when I smoke. So that wasn't really suitable for me. And back then they didn't have a lot of tinctures available. And I was like, how can I do this? So I learned to extract and infuse oil. And that's when I started making edibles. And I always knew that the edibles in the dispensaries were just, the sugar I can't do. Mm-hmm. So it was a trial and error kind of process for me. It took me 3 years to wean myself off of the opioids. Wow. And I had no medical assistance.
Wow.
In fact, one of my doctors, I didn't know this, but I went to my doctors and said, could you write me a prescription for marijuana? And they looked at me like, no. Mm-hmm. And they were all sort of like, no, that's not how this works. Mm-hmm. And I was confused. And I said, I really don't want to take these opioids anymore, and I'm not going to take gabapentin anymore. And one of my doctors, a pain doctor, actually told me I was drug seeking.
Wow. Because
I wanted cannabis.
Amazing.
Yeah. So that doctor got fired.
Quick. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So then, I just went through the process gradually over time, learning how to make the food that would help me heal and get off of those pills, and then weaning myself off of the opioids. So
do you think, Pattie, that the medical world, thinking of the doctor that you fired, do you think he was against cannabis because he heard the word marijuana, or because he felt like it was Well, probably at that time it was still illegal. It was probably
Yes.
before 2016.
Yes, it
right?
was.
Okay.
Yeah, it was 2011.
Okay. So do you think that he was against it because of the name or because he felt like it was really close to cocaine and heroin and you'll get addicted?
I think yes. The short answer is yes, but there's a caveat to that, and I'm learning that more and more as I go through my pharmaceutical training. That there is a machine in place for propaganda in this country, and probably throughout the world. I don't know, but I felt like he was a victim of propaganda, just like I was, and I also felt like this system trains doctors in a certain way. And one of the legal things that doctors are very conscious of, it's changing now, but back then it was maybe 2010 when I started talking to my doctors. They know that if they speak to me about cannabis, they could lose their federal funding because it's a Schedule I drug. So I didn't know that either, but they were very sensitive to that, and that's why they didn't want to speak to me about it. So I think it's part of the whole system of propaganda.
Yeah. So the propaganda, but it's backed up by law.
Yes.
Because cannabis is Schedule I drug.
Yes.
And you can't. It's a no.
Exactly.
Okay.
And back then, hemp was also Schedule I. So they were sort of in the same, category as far as, what doctors or medical people could do with it.
That's interesting because hemp, my research is that hemp has been part of the world,
Yes.
specifically the United States,
Yes.
from the beginning. If you
Yes.
want to go back to the founding fathers, there were clothes, items made out of hemp,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So how did hemp? Well, let me ask you this: what is the difference then between hemp and cannabis?
I'm so glad you asked me that. I brought my notes. So the shortest answer I can give you is it's a legal distinction. It's legal. So what the law says in the state of California is that if it is 0.3%, it is, or more, it is cannabis. And that means THC, the percent of THC in the plant. If it's 0.299 or less, it is hemp with THC. That's the only difference. Now, there are many, many strains of hemp. There are many, many strains of cannabis. There's kind of some broad phenotypes that exist. But hemp is a cannabis sativa plant. It's a taller, longer, more industrial plant. And there's many, many varieties of hemp. Some of them look and smell just exactly like cannabis, but they have the lower THC. And in this country, there actually were people, pre-Columbian people, who used hemp or cannabis, whatever you want to call it. I tend to call it cannabis because to me that's the scientific name for it, whether it's hemp or not. I'm half Native American, so I know of a tribe in Nebraska that actually has pre-Columbian hemp on their reservation.
Okay.
A lot of people in the southern part of the United States and into Mexico, there's a long history of using hemp and cannabis for, medicinal reasons. But hemp
will not produce the psychoactive.
If it's less than
less than the point 0.03. 0.3.
Now, let me just clear that up a little bit or make a little finer point. If you go to another country in Europe, say Romania, their law says 1%.
Ooh.
So that's 3 times more the THC than we have allowed here. Even at 1%, you won't get high. And the reason for that is because of CBD. CBD is very plentiful in hemp plants, and CBD actually is an antagonist, and what that means is it kind of stops THC from working. So a lot of times I advise patients about, if they get too high, what do? I tell them to take a dropper full of CBD tincture because it will bring them down in a gentle way. It will kind of to put it in a sort of easy way to understand, there's a high affinity to the receptors for for CBD, and it will just knock the CBD or the THC right out of that receptor in your nerve or your body, wherever it is, whatever cell. So,
So, Patty, if somebody goes to a dispensary, and as they go, they know that, well, I have this pain. What should they ask for?
I feel like dispensaries are getting better at training bud tenders, and a lot of times bud tenders don't know. They kind of know what the products are, but they don't know how that applies to a medical patient. And it's really a precarious position for a bud tender to be in, because advising a medical patient about something is a little dicey. And so I think that if a person goes into a dispensary, they should try to be as very specific as they can be. I have pain specifically where? Like maybe I have a little arthritis in my fingers. That would, to me, suggest a topical to start with, or a very low dose kind of either smoking it or an edible or a tincture that was low dose, so that they could try out, and see how did it affect them.
Can they ask for something that's hemp based?
I think there are some dispensaries that have hemp products in them, but hemp you can get from Amazon. You can get hemp-based CBD from all over. But the quality may or may not be there, so it's important for people to look at all of the ingredients and really kind of investigate the company that's making it. Some companies are just kind of out there doing it for the money, and some companies are very, very invested in the quality. The biggest, I guess, indicator of quality for me is full spectrum. And that means they don't isolate molecules out of the plant. So you can buy hemp isolate. It's called CBD isolate. It looks like white crystalline powder. And it's pure CBD. It comes from hemp. It's the exact same molecules you'll find in cannabis. But Epidiolex is a pharmaceutical product that's made by GW Pharmaceuticals, and it's been developed specifically to control pediatric epilepsy that's very hard to treat, and things like Dravet syndrome. And that is made from hemp. It is isolated CBD, and they're starting. I think it got approved in 2016, if I remember correctly. And they're starting to find that kids are getting liver damage.
And I can tell by your depth and breadth of knowledge, your personality, and your passion for this, that people listening would want to talk with you. Is that possible?
Yes.
For them, how would they
Yes.
How would they get in touch with you?
So I have a Instagram account, Pattie Harris, and then my regular Facebook is just Pattie Cakes, but I do have a Pattie Cakes website on there as well. So they can contact me through either one of those, or they could just email me, pattiecakes.information@gmail.com. And I do love to teach. I'm actually developing a curriculum right now, not specifically for hemp, but it will be included in the overall curriculum. We're trying to teach youth, kids, college age and younger, like high school, organic, sustainable permaculture kind of cultivation and farming practices. Because for me, it's a very holistic thing. Cannabis is one plant. It's a very miraculous plant, but there's a lot of plants that can help us, to heal our bodies and that kind of stuff. So,
I like your comment that you gave concerning if you have some type of ailment, you need to be very specific as you go into the dispensary and not just say, I got pain.
You're right. Yeah.
You need to be able to say where the pain is and maybe how intense it is.
Yeah. Yes. And in my experience, when patients come to me, they have kind of some broad categories of complaints and the reasons they want to try cannabis. Pain is the top of the list. Number 2 would probably be sleep. They can't sleep and they need help with sleep. And then probably third would be either anxiety or something along those lines. Maybe depression, I don't know, something like that.
Now, is it true that different bodies will react differently?
Absolutely. And even the same body will react differently from day to day.
Okay.
So we all are individuals. We all have our own unique genetics. We also have our own unique set of circumstances in our environment that influence our body, how our body takes in any kind of chemicals that we put in our body. So, I have some diabetic problems that cause me to have a little bit more difficulty with digestion. That's not, most people digest just fine. So when I take an edible, it could take up to 2 hours for it to become psychoactive.
We need to, let's stop there for a minute, because a lot of people believe that, like alcohol, if you take a drink of alcohol straight, alcohol, maybe within 5 or 10 minutes, you start feeling something. Maybe 15 minutes, you start feeling something. That's not the case with hemp or THC. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true. So alcohol can absorb through every membrane in your body. Like you could take a bath in alcohol and get drunk.
Oh my gosh.
That's how alcohol works. It goes into all of your body. It permeates the blood-brain barrier. It's a very powerful kind of chemical. THC doesn't work like that. THC is there's really a few ways that you can get it, but we have what's called in our body an endocannabinoid system, and there are specific types of receptors. They've discovered 2. They think they've discovered a few more, but they're not, the science is still evolving. So one of them is called CB1, and that is primarily the receptor in your body that THC has an affinity for. So CB1 is located throughout your nervous system, and that's why you feel psychoactive. CB2 is the second receptor, and that is part of your immune system. So it's found in your gut, it's found on your skin, it's found throughout your whole body, but not as heavily in your nervous system, because it's out there trying to regulate the rest of your body and your system. So CBD has a higher affinity to the CB2 receptor, although both of them can interact with those receptors.
So it may take, can you say how long it might take?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
So what happens when you eat a tincture? Now, when you're smoking, it's almost instant, because what happens is the smoke goes into your lungs, it crosses into your heart immediately into the bloodstream because of that vascular system that's in your lungs. So it takes 5 to 10 minutes to feel psychoactive after you smoke. Okay. But if you eat it, it's got to go through your gut. So it starts in your stomach where there's a lot of acid. A lot of the chemicals get broken down in your acid, so that reduces the bioavailability. Then it goes into your duodenum and your intestines, and it travels to your liver. Once it gets to your liver does something with THC. So most people have heard of Delta-9 THC, which is what you smoke. When it gets into your liver, it's changed to hydroxy-11 THC, which it doesn't mean anything except for you're a lot higher and it lasts a lot longer when it's changed to that. So it really kind of is dependent on your liver. How long does your liver take to get that back out into the bloodstream and circulating so that you can feel that psychoactivity?
And I would imagine what condition your liver is in, perhaps?
Absolutely, yeah.
So if your liver is damaged from years of alcohol, then you're...
or fatty liver disease is another one.
Okay. It may take longer, or
Yes.
it may not happen?
Yes, that could even be. I've seen people with that, So, yeah, it's interesting. And if someone had a liver disorder like that, I would probably suggest that they smoke or vaporize.
So now I've heard people say that some of my friends and some students, they volunteer information and they say, well, I've taken THC, I've smoked it, I've done the oils, I've done every which way, and it doesn't affect me. It doesn't seem to affect me. What causes that?
That's a good question. It's probably a very individual thing because I had that experience when I was a kid too, when I was in college.
Okay.
I tried it, nothing happened. And I feel like part of it was my own psyche, my own resistance or fear of it. But also I didn't know how. I didn't know that I should hold it in my lungs. I didn't know how much I should take. I was just like, okay, somebody's passing me a roach. I take a drag, pass it on. I didn't know what I was doing.
Okay, so some of our audience is going to think that you're actually smoking a roach.
Oh, I'm sorry.
A bug.
I'm old. I'm an old lady.
No. This is Cannabis Enlightenment, and I'm trying to bring education
Let's
to
call
everybody.
it a joint.
So, a joint. So we're not talking about smoking a bug.
No, we're not.
Okay, we're talking about smoking a cannabis
Cigarette.
a cigarette that is small towards
Yes.
the end of it.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, a little tiny.
Little tiny. But even though it's a little tiny, it still has enough THC in it.
Yes, it would have if I would have known what I was doing.
Okay.
But I didn't, It was like just a little puff in my mouth and then I, didn't do any. I didn't inhale it very well and I definitely didn't hold it in my lungs for it to actually be available into my bloodstream.
Okay, so now we've talked about the fact that different body types will metabolize it differently. And you've also brought into our thinking that how you feel psychologically, what you're thinking comes into it.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah, for sure. It does.
Okay.
And when I very first started teaching people, it was mostly seniors. And a lot of them had never tried it, or if they did, they were kind of like me. They did it back in college and they never tried it again. So I always would encourage them to be in a really safe feeling place, some place that they felt, at ease, some place where they could be mindful, where they felt sort of protected, especially the first time they're doing it, so that they could really explore how this medicine interacts with their body and really kind of observe how everything is happening. I also tell people don't take any alcohol with it or don't take any kind of other psychoactive drugs because it's going to affect that sensation, that effect that cannabis is going to have on your body. So even comes down to food. Like I mentioned turmeric before. If you're eating a lot of sugar, it makes you get high faster. If you drink alcohol, it makes you get high faster. So those kinds of things influence the bioavailability of cannabis.
Now, that's a great place for us to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere, because when we come back, we'll have more with our guest and Dr. Leroy. You're listening to the Cannabis Enlightened podcast, powered by March and Ash.
Podcast listeners, stay with me. If you're listening, if you can hear my voice, you are obviously seeking quality content that is engaging, enlightening, and insightful. Otherwise, you'd be out skiing, playing golf, or at the beach. So if you're hearing this, you are connected to IVN, and they are the leaders in content and explication. That's a fancy word. So I recommend that you sign up and subscribe to I'm There For You, Baby, the Entrepreneur's Guide to the Galaxy. I, Neil Centuria, your faithful co-host, along with my bride and partner, we will give you a quench of thirst for knowledge. How do you like that? And we're there for you, along with IVN.org. You can find us wherever you get your podcast. And remember the most famous line of all from Bernard Baruch, a pleasant old billionaire. He said, you can't go broke taking a profit.
Anne-Marie Schubert brings her years of experience to the new podcast, Inside the Crime Files.
Oh, this podcast is going to reveal the innovative things that were done to either solve crime or the innovative things that came out of crime. It's really going to be extraordinary.
Subscribe at InsideCrimeFiles.com.
Welcome back to the Cannabis Enlightened podcast. I'm Chris Cantore, and here's more from our host, Dr. Leroy Brady.
I like the way you use the term medicine. Now, it's also a drug, but medicine, I think, is a term that more people can accept because they think of, Tylenol is medicine, Advil is medicine, Bayer, aspirin is medicine. But hemp and cannabis, THC, CBD, that's medicine.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And for me, I've always called it that. As soon as I started developing my infused oils, I was like, this is medicine. I need to call this medicine. The pharmaceuticals that I was on, they were drugs. You know, and it was just my own way of kind of accepting this or navigating this.
Yeah. I like the way you made the distinction between the medicine and the drugs. And you know, if I can venture into it, the medicine is something that's going to do you good.
Yes.
And the drugs were harmful.
Yes. And I really have a lot of medicine that I use, not just cannabis.
Sure.
I use music. I use meditation. I use yoga. I use exercise. I use the food that I eat. So to me, it's all medicine, you know?
So now, let me make clear or help you, if you can help me make clear, the fact that all hemp is not equal.
Yeah.
Because, you know, our topic is hemp today.
Yeah.
But just because a person goes into a grocery store, a health food store, their gym, and they see a bottle that says hemp, grabbing that and taking it, paying for it, and then taking it, meaning putting it into your system,
Yes.
does not mean it's going to be medicine that's going to work.
Yeah. Yes, that's true. I would advise anybody who just wants to get something off the shelf, they read the label very carefully. Labels will tell you a lot of things. The biggest thing I would encourage somebody to look for is something called full spectrum.
Full spectrum.
Yeah. Sometimes they call it FECO, which stands for full extract cannabis oil. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of chemicals in hemp. They've discovered over 500 phytochemicals that have medicinal value in hemp, in cannabis. And so it's not in every plant because each variety has its own little mosaic of different phytochemicals. And so that's why different strains have different effects on people, because it's got some of this and some of that and not some of the other things. And so it's very, very complicated in that way. And that's another reason why people have different varying levels of psychoactivity, because it's really about what the chemicals are in the plant when they use it.
Now, they're also going to see these different percentages, I guess.
Yes.
The amount of
Yes.
something. Now, you were saying that it should have a point, 0.3.
0.3 or,
okay.
well, actually, it's 0.299.
0.299.
Yes, and that's hemp. But if they say hemp on the label, you can be sure it's hemp. They're not gonna, try and. I mean, I don't know, maybe, but anybody who's on an established kind of market, whether it's Sprouts or Whole Foods or Amazon, they're going to be vetted to some point by the company that's selling their products. But, if you get on a website, you may not have that. If you got Joe's CBD down the street, you may not have that assurance. So I really just encourage the labeling. If there's any way to research about the company, that's another good thing. So companies who really try to do this will advertise, we have an ISO 9000 lab that we do this in, which is medical grade. Or, they might say, well, we do this special extraction process that is... I don't know, winterized or something. There may be a distinction that brings out the quality of their medicine. But if they're just like, here's my CBD oil, there's 1,000 milligrams and it tastes like cherry, maybe not so great. I think you should investigate those.
That is a fantastic example, because I've seen that on counters, 1,000 milligrams, 2,000. And most people feel like the bigger the number.
Yes. Yes.
The better the product that's inside.
Yeah.
But that's not true either.
No, it's really not. And if it says 1,000 milligrams, it may be 1,000 milligrams of CBD, or it may be 1,000 milligrams of all the cannabinoids that are in there. And that's why you have to really tease down, and get into those details. Because there's a lot of, some of this cannabinoids that are very healthy and beneficial that I recommend to people. Have never even heard of them. One of them is cannabinol. It's an oxidized form of THC. It is not psychoactive, but it is very, very good at helping people sleep and also helping with pain relief. Another one is CBG. That's the very first cannabinoid that grows in all cannabis plants, hemp and cannabis. And it's kind of, you can think of it like a stem cell, because all of the other cannabinoids grow from CBG. Yeah. Okay. So cannabigerol is what it, the full name of it. It's very anti-inflammatory, and it has a lot of therapeutic properties, but people don't know about CBG. They're just mostly THC and CBD because of marketing reasons. So that's another reason to read the label. What is actually in here?
Okay, all right. So you've talked about the hemp and the differences, or the difference between the hemp and the CBD and the THC. Within hemp, is there anything special that people should look for?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about the medical stuff, I feel like you really should look at yourself as an individual. There are people to guide, individuals on dosing. Dispensaries are usually a good resource. You might have to ask a few people before you find somebody that has the knowledge to help somebody specifically. There are cannabis nurses. There are cannabis doctors.
And you certainly want to go to a legal cannabis dispensary.
Yes, and that's because of the safety measures that are written into the law. People can't extract with butane, and they can't harvest a plant and sell it that has mold on it. All of those things are toxic to patients. And so those things are really kind of taken out of the equation if it's in the legal market. But if you're kind of in the black market or the gray market, you're kind of taking your chances. Unless you know who you're dealing with, you could.
So if you've got a friend down the street that is dispensing hemp or cannabis, you should be wary of that.
Yeah. I would ask some questions.
Okay.
So I used to have a friend in probably around 2015 who was making hemp oil, and he was buying CBD isolate from Colorado and then mixing it into MTC coconut oil, which is a very healthy oil. It's most of the tinctures that are available now are made of MTC. But it was isolate, and he'd put a little flavor in there, to make it taste good when you put it in your mouth. But it's not necessarily bad for you, but if you take a lot of it, it really can damage your liver. If you were taking 1,000 milligrams a day over the course of a year or two, you could do some liver damage. But when you have the full broad concert of chemicals that are in the plant and they're extracted and then put into the medicine, you don't have that. It's like the difference between white bread and wheat bread, whole wheat bread.
Okay.
You're getting more of the plant in it, and that balance is what keeps the kind of stuff going sideways.
I like the way you're talking about that people need to be informed about the different aspects of hemp and THC and CBD.
Yeah.
And then you've gone on to talk about many more of the cannabinoids.
Yeah.
But you've also indicated the fact that people need to do the research themselves.
Yeah.
And not just say, okay, this is hemp, and it's Patty Cake says it's good for me, so I'm going to take it.
Yeah. I mean, if you trust somebody, that's okay to do. But I really feel like people should kind of do their own homework and really invest into it. And one of the other things that I think is important is that we're living in a time where all of this is a product of propaganda, a product of history. So you're right. Back in the founding fathers, they grew hemp. They smoked hemp cigarettes. They had the Declaration of Independence is printed on hemp paper. Sails and ropes and textiles were made of hemp because the hemp fiber is so high quality and strong and durable. And hemp is a really wonderful crop because it can mature as early as 2 months. And it's a fast growing crop. So here in San Diego, in this county, you can have 4 crops a year. Wow. And if you have the right kind of genetics, you can have what's called a triple crop. So what a triple crop is, you harvest the flowers, and you're either going to extract oil or you're going to have smokable hemp from the flowers. Then you harvest the stalks. The stalks are used for fiber and for hurd. There's many applications, and I can go into those later if you want for what they use that for. But there's many things that can be done with hemp, and then finally seeds is another part of that crop. So it's really cool. There's a company in Texas who's developing those kind of genetics so that farmers can actually have these triple crops and increase their viability as far as economically speaking.
So basically, as the topic of this episode is the difference between the hemp and cannabis. Mm-hmm. They both are flowers.
Yes.
They both grow up.
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. You talked about the different look
yes.
of hemp than cannabis. And it almost sounds like you're saying hemp grows faster?
Not necessarily. So let me go back to the different varieties of hemp.
Okay.
Or I should say cannabis. So hemp is cannabis sativa. And sativa is typically a tall, thinner.
And what does sativa do?
Sativa is actually named for that because of the origin of the world that it came from. So sativas were sort of wild in the wild, come from Africa, come from the Middle East, come from India, come from Afghanistan, those kind of places. Mm-hmm. But then there's another form of cannabis that is more bushy and shorter, and that's indica. Cannabis indica, and that comes from a different part of the world. That's more in the it's also in Afghanistan and those kind of places, but it's more over in the Himalayan regions and in China and that kind of thing. And then the final one is ruderalis, and cannabis ruderalis is a plant that people still use. It's not very high potency as far as flowering goes. It's a very small plant. And that comes from places like Russia and Siberia because it's a very short, fast-growing plant. And it has a really wonderful genetic quality to ruderalis, which is an auto-flowering. So most cannabis plants have to flower on a light cycle. They need specific light timing in order to get them to flower. But ruderalis doesn't. It's a time-based thing, and it's because of its genetics. So people will use ruderalis in a genetic kind of combination to get the flowers to come on at a specific time.
So it sounds like you're talking about 4 different plants.
Yeah.
So you talked about hemp,
mm-hmm.
and then sativa, mm-hmm. indica,
mm-hmm.
and then the last one,
ruderalis.
Ruderalis. Okay. So do they have different effects on the body?
Not really. I mean, THC is THC, CBD is CBD. Doesn't matter what kind of plant it comes from. But yes, in another way, because if it has other cannabinoids in it, if it has other phytochemicals, they're called terpenes. They're called, what's the other one? I don't know. Anyway, there's a lot of plant chemicals, mm-hmm. and so each one of those individual chemicals is going to contribute to the overall effect of however when somebody uses it.
Right.
So,
okay,
that's a kind of complicated question. And hemp really is sativa. So hemp is a layman's term, if that makes sense. Hemp is the biggest of all. Hemp can get 20 feet tall. It can be a small tree, and it can do that in a few months. It's amazing.
But hemp won't get you high unless you're smiling. So
well, that's because I work with a lot of hemp farmers.
Okay.
Those poor guys, they got it rough, because they buy these seeds. They spend a lot of money on seeds. They plant a big crop.
Okay.
They get the crop, it grows, and then it goes hot. And what that means is it's more than 0.3% THC.
So they can't sell it as hemp.
And they can't sell it as weed either because they don't have a license for cannabis.
Oh my gosh.
So it's very tragic. Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So they're between a rock and a hard place.
They really are.
That.
Yeah.
Could they sell it to legal cannabis?
No, not in this state.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no way. Because of the metric system, it's track and trace from seed to sale.
Oh, yeah. So if the seed is hemp, it's got to be hemp when it flowers.
Exactly.
And if it's not hemp when it flowers, you're done.
Yeah, and the state requires you to destroy it which is horrible. And like I say, I work with hemp farmers, and I hear these horror stories, and it's awful. And even the ones that have the good crops that aren't hot, there's really not much of a market. There's not an infrastructure built into the cannabis industry yet in this country. Hemp became legal in this country in 2018. With the 2018 Farm Bill that President Trump signed, it became legal. And people were like, well, what are we supposed to do with that? I don't know. But another interesting thing is that back in the beginnings of this country, and even into the 20th century, hemp was very, very prominent. Around the turn of the century, in the early 1900s, there started to be animosity about hemp, and also the powers of those times. There were the big money moguls in this country were Hearst, DuPont, Mellon, Rockefeller, and Carnegie. Did not like hemp. The reason why was because...
That's my question.
I anticipated your question.
Right.
No, they didn't like it because they were in the petrochemical business, they were in the steel business, and they were also in the wood business. Okay. And so hemp was a direct competition to that, and they did not want that to be a viable option. So they worked really hard to build a whole propaganda campaign. Okay. William Randolph Hearst, his son-in-law was hired. He was hired as the country's very first drug czar, and his name is Harry Anslinger, and he started a campaign to really vilify weed. And they in 1937 they passed the Marijuana Stamp Act. People had to pay a lot of money in order to grow it, including hemp. And it was kind of this, we can't do that anymore. And then on the marketing side, on the public side, on the propaganda, a lot of things started coming out about hemp and cannabis, and it really vilifying it with a racial overtone that was very awful. They were vilifying it and using Mexican people. So the word marijuana to me is a racist word. I don't like to use it because it was brought into popularity as a way to vilify Mexican people and to say, these Mexican people are using marijuana. The other sort of cultural group that they targeted was Black people and jazz singers specifically, and they wanted to say, these terrible Black people and their jazz music, they're so sinful and they smoke weed, kind of thing. So that whole campaign was pretty successful. And then in the 40s, during World War II, the country said, wait, we need hemp, and they required farmers to grow it. And they didn't have any 0.3%. They didn't care. They just wanted the plant because they knew it was useful. So it's been, it's been kind of an awful smear campaign, I guess. And we're all the victim of it because we were cut off from the real knowledge. Cannabis was actually in the pharmacopoeia of this country in the 1900s, in the early 1900s. And like I say, industrial hemp is not going to be psychoactive, but there are so many uses for it. So I'll tell you a funny story. Henry Ford invented a car that was made almost completely of hemp.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay.
The hemp plastic, the hemp, everything he could get, because the fiber is so strong, it was able to make the whole car, except for the metal parts. And then the really cool thing with that car, he sold you this little machine. It was an extractor, so you could make your own biofuel out of hemp.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That probably didn't last very long.
No, because of these 5 guys.
Yeah.
And they were like, no, you can't do that. And they were actually, I guess the word would be mentoring Henry Ford at that time. They were sort of coaching him along, and they literally made him destroy the car, destroy the plans, destroy any record of what that thing was. Yeah.
Well, I'm learning something new here, learning a lot of things new from you. However, the fact that Harry was an in-law of Hearst?
Yes.
Now that I did not know. So, that I did not know. So he married into big money.
Yeah, he did.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
My goodness. And he, through several presidential administrations
He did,
was
yeah.
really big in stamping out
Yeah.
and keeping down
Yeah.
cannabis.
He and J. Edgar Hoover.
Yes.
And the first agency was called the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which eventually evolved into the FBI.
Yeah.
So yeah, those two guys lasted a few decades.
And was that after they lost their fight? I mean, the fight with alcohol. Alcohol became legal.
Yeah,
Okay?
that was right after Prohibition.
Right
when
after
that
Prohibition.
all started.
So they didn't have anything else to fight against.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's drugs.
Yeah.
And there's black people
Yeah.
and Mexican people, and let's do something here.
And the teetotalers were ready to jump on that.
Oh my.
They were ready to be like, oh, hemp is the new alcohol, and we hate that too, and all these brown people that use it, you know. So it's really awful.
Okay, is there anything else that you can tell us about that our audience needs to know about hemp and THC, CBD, that would help them in making decisions about, well, should I even try this hemp product?
I mean, for medical reasons, yes, I would say always try it. Like I said, be careful, read the label, do your homework. But yes, I think there is a lot of potential to help people because we all have an endocannabinoid system. We all have aches and pains or things that kind of bring us down. Even if it's medical or mental, you still can get some benefit even from CBD. There's a lot of people that claim that CBD helps them feel more relaxed. There's a lot of people that say CBD helps them sleep better. So for me specifically, CBD helps my stomach not hurt. So it's highly individual, and it's just almost an experimental thing for each individual person to use on themselves.
And it's natural.
It is, yeah.
Natural. So people shouldn't feel like, oh, I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah.
I'm taking the next step is cocaine.
Yeah, it's not. That's the propaganda, and I thank you for saying that because you remember that commercial back in the 80s with the frying pan and the egg and your brain on drugs.
I do.
That was talking about everything, including cannabis, heroin, cocaine, crack, all of it. And it's so wrong. You know, it's not the case at all. It's actually good for our body. Yes, we can use too much. Yes, we can use it in the wrong way and do some damage, but for the most part, you're safe.
Yeah, but you can eat too much chocolate.
Exactly. Or drink too much caffeine.
Yes, absolutely. And the results are devastating many times.
Yeah.
Or people still take too much alcohol.
Yeah.
And they unfortunately drive under the influence.
Yes.
And there are disastrous effects of that.
Yeah.
But to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, there has never been an overdose of cannabis.
There's never been a recorded overdose of cannabis. I'm a psychopharmacology student, so I know this. In the drug classifications, they have lethal doses. There's no known lethal dose for cannabis.
I think the only way cannabis would actually kill you is if somebody dropped 3 or 4 tons of cannabis on your head.
There you go. A big bale of weed.
Big bale of
Smash
weed.
me flat.
Yeah, I can see the news now. This weed killed this young man.
Yeah.
Dropped on his head, but not consuming it at all.
They did a study, I want to say about 5 years ago, and I believe it was in Tennessee, where they were comparing, it was an academic study. The research they were doing was to compare drunk driving with alcohol or driving under the influence of cannabis.
Okay.
And they found that people were, and I'm not trying to encourage anybody to drive under the influence of anything, but they did find that people had a little bit better response time and they had better muscle coordination than people who are drinking alcohol in that study.
Now, you talked about the fact that you used hemp, cannabis to help you to come away from
Get off of drugs.
the drugs, the opioid drugs, and that was like a 2-year battle, a 2-year journey for you?
3 years,
Okay. Now, what was the detrimental, other than the fact that you were catatonic, what is some of the detrimental effects of the opioids in your system?
Opioids, they're addicting. That's the top of the list. And I was for sure addicted. The other thing with opioids is they affect your digestive system. And I think that's probably a little bit of, the reason why I have some issues with my digestion, because I was on them for well over 10 years. And so when somebody takes an opioid, it can cause constipation. And when you stop taking an opioid, you can get really intense diarrhea, which could be dangerous. You could be dehydrated and things like that, especially if they're a medical patient. So that's kind of the biggest one, but the psychological effects are there too, and that's kind of individual for everybody. You know, how can I take myself off of this medicine and still feel okay in my mind, you know? And that's where I feel like the beauty of cannabis was, because I started very small because I didn't know what my dose was, and there was no medical anything to guide me. So I started at 2.5 milligrams, and it made me feel a little silly, but I wasn't really high. And it lasted for maybe a couple of hours, and I could skip a pill by doing that. And that's how I did it gradually over time. So
And now it took, I know we talked about this earlier, it took a while for the effects to come to your body, to get to your body.
Yes.
And you took it, as you took this, it was from an oil?
No, I was really lucky actually, and I kind of discovered this on accident. I found this a dispensary. It was up on University and Iowa Street, and they had lollipops that were specifically 2.5 milligrams, and I was like, well, this is a little bit of sugar. It's not going to be too much for me. And I would suck on it. So what happens when you suck on it, if you eat a lozenge or a lollipop or something like that, it absorbs through your mucous membranes. So it's not going through your digestive system. It's not getting into your liver. It's going directly into your bloodstream through your mucous membranes. And that's called sublingual absorption, and it takes maybe 5 to 10 minutes. So I was like really fortunate to discover that and really kind of dial in, how do I dose myself, how does it affect me, and how can I handle myself when I'm feeling like this. So it was a nice way to do it, and it didn't take very long for it to take effect.
So it's good that you have shared with the listening audience the fact that there are different ways that you can consume it.
Yes.
And we're not talking, we haven't spent a lot of time, if any, talking about smoking.
Yeah.
And most people are of the
Yeah.
opinion that, well, but I'm going to get high, I got to smoke it.
Yeah.
Or if I'm going to get some relief from pain, I got to smoke it.
Yeah.
But that's just not true.
Not necessarily. And you can also put it on your skin and get pain relief. I have all kinds of aches and pains, and I make a cream that I put on my joints and, you know, places where it hurt. So,
So
it'll absorb there too.
It goes right through the skin to the actual pain point.
Yes, there are CB receptors on our skin. There are also CB receptors in our interstitial tissue.
Now, when you say receptors, what do you mean?
When you have, all of the cells in your body have different mechanisms for bioavailability. So let's take your skin, for example. Every skin cell may not have a CB receptor, but there's enough of them on here so that it's going to be able to absorb, you know, into my skin over the course of time. If you put THC on your skin, it will help with pain relief, but it won't, most likely for most people, it won't make them high. It will, I have actually met people that felt a little weird. That's exactly what she told me when she tried it. She's like, oh, I feel a little tingly and weird. So maybe it did have a slight psychoactivity, but mostly it was giving her pain relief. So
It's interesting how people that I have found, people that say that have no problem at all with having 2 or 3 margaritas or
right.
martinis or
Yes.
whatever, straight shots or something.
Yeah.
But I think we've been led to believe that there's something wrong with feeling a little bit different, a little bit tingly, if you take something that has THC in it.
I agree.
There's something wrong with that, but it's not.
Yeah, no. What's wrong with feeling good?
that's an indication that it's working.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yeah, for
Okay.
sure. When I very first started, I was nervous about being high because I didn't know what I was gonna. I didn't know if I was acting like a maniac or I was a victim of the propaganda.
Yeah.
So the first time I smoked in my apartment, and I got high, and I was like, "This is the best antidepressant that's ever been discovered," And I was like, "It's like a no-brainer," but that's not how science wants us to look at it. That's not how the system wants us to look at it. That's not how the DEA wants it to look at it.
And I like the fact that you talked about the fact that when you tried it, you were in your apartment. I mean, this is not, if you're trying it for the first time, you shouldn't be out at a party,
Yeah.
or especially driving.
Yeah.
You need to take it in a safe environment, either by yourself or with someone that knows what's going on and cares about
Yes,
you.
that's really good advice.
So that you can measure the effects and that you're safe.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Now, is there anything else that if someone is trying it for the first time, are there some liquids or some kind of fluids or something, food that they might want to have ready to take?
Yes, CBD will actually give you dry mouth just like THC will. It will cause you to feel a little, it could cause you, not necessarily will, but it could cause you to feel tired. It could help you feel, most people say they feel a little more relaxed when they use CBD. So those are things to keep in mind before you ingest it.
But those are good things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
But I don't want to be really relaxed if I'm at a concert.
No.
You know what I mean? So those are things you have to kind of look at your environment.
Yeah.
Is this a suitable place to do this?
Make some decisions for yourself.
Exactly.
Responsible decisions.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So once again, can we go back and talk about how people would be able to get in touch with you?
Yes. So I have an IG account. It's Pattie Cakes Harris. And then my Facebook is just Pattie Harris. And there's a Pattie Cakes on there, a webpage on Facebook. And then lastly, my email address is pattiecakes.information@gmail.com.
So it has been a pure delight, Pattie, to talk with you and hear you talk about hemp and cannabis, THC. You're just a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate you being here. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
If you'd like to hear more Cannabis Enlightened with Dr. Leroy, be sure to visit us online at cannabisenlightened.com and subscribe wherever you download your podcasts. Cannabis Enlightened is produced in San Diego, California, and presented by March and Ash at marchandash.com. On behalf of Dr. Leroy, I'm Chris Cantori, and thank you for listening.
American democracy's good, but we can make it better. The National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers includes organizations across the country who are working right now to build a better democracy by opening primaries, implementing safe, secure voting systems, reducing corruption, and increasing transparency. Listen to our weekly podcast, How to Win Friends and Save the Republic, to hear updates from the latest movements in the democracy reform space. Subscribe and learn more about us at nonpartisanreformers.org.